Hi everyone, this is Dr. Domingo, and in this video I'm going to go over one of the most useful tools to help you complete your dissertation, and this is called the dissertation checklist. I love this picture because it represents what is going to go on before we call you doctor. And essentially, this is one of the ground crew aboard an aircraft carrier, and there's so many different checks that have to happen before a plane can launch, both on an aircraft carrier and, of course, on a commercial aircraft carrier. There's numerous people here to help you get through, to help you launch, of course, or to get that plane off the ground. From those that help with the ordnances, the fuel people, the catapult people, the safety people, etc. But all in all, the main point is that there's so many different checks that need to happen before a plane can be launched, and of course, before we can arrive at completing your dissertation. So this is a uh, 5-chapter review, obviously, the review of the 5 chapters of the dissertation that we've covered in all of the residencies. You'll notice this is very familiar to all of you. And of course, before you are called Dr. So-and-so, you have to go through all these steps. It is a journey, and you have your introduction, you have your literature review, your methodology, your findings, or sometimes results in a quantitative study, and then, of course, you have your conclusions. And I thought one of the neat analogies that I like using is from movies. And as you've I'm sure seen throughout some of the videos, and if you've seen me live at residencies, you'll know that I'm a big movie geek. And I thought I would equate the 5 chapters of a dissertation to a movie. And so your introduction, you could think of it like the previews. So in every movie, there is the previews that you sit down for. Sometimes there are even previews that you just want to see for the previews, and then you leave and don't want to watch the movie. It's happened a few times in movie history, but your introduction is the coming soon part. It tells the reader of your dissertation what's going to happen, sort of previews the problem statement, the methodology, the um, context of the literature, the background of the problem, all that kind of stuff. So just kind of a highlight of really your dissertation that's upcoming. The literature review happens, and when you're writing your dissertation, it seems like an endless back and forth phase that you're never out of this phase. And The Terminal is a great movie because in that movie, Tom Hanks is stuck in a terminal and he can never leave until all certain conditions are met. And at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he gets to leave the terminal. Now, the literature review is kind of like this terminal where you're going back and forth with your chair, committee. Hey, let's look at this. Oh, did you look at this in the literature? And you feel that it's this constant, am I ever going to get out of this point? And this is where a lot of students, sort of get stuck in that literature review because there's so much to do and you're analyzing, you're synthesizing, you're evaluating research, all that kind of stuff. Then you get to your methodology. And Fight Club, I just put there because the great line in Fight Club is the number one rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. Second rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. And methodology just reminds me that despite which one you choose, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, you have to protect your subjects and you keep stuff confidential. And so, I just thought, hey, methodology, why not? Then your findings. Well, the findings are interesting because your findings will tell you exactly what happened. So on The Hangover, you have this movie that these buddies in Las Vegas figure out what just happened the night before. And the findings are telling about what just happened, the results. And so if you just read the findings alone, you can kind of tell, this study was looking for something methodologically. And so, again, ties back together to the methodology. And finally, your conclusion is when you tie it all together and you fight Darth Vader and you say, "Hey, I'm finally a Jedi," or "I'm finally a doctor," that kind of thing. So, 5 chapters to a dissertation, and you'll get there. All of you will. I'm very confident you shall. This picture, the day of the dissertation defense, the morning of the defense, students, I've seen this all the time. You're nervous and everything. What do I do? I've spent all these years of my life and you say, wow, this is it. And your spouse, significant other, partner, friends, oh wow, this is it. Finally, this person's going to get done. Well, I remind students that in any dissertation defense, that student who's defending is the expert, not the chair, not the committee, not the reader, the external readers, the dean, provost. No, none of them are the experts. The student, you are the expert. You did the research, you did the methodology, you did the surveys, you did the research, you did the analysis, whatever statistics it is. You were the one that did that. And so go in with confidence, knowing that you're the one that did all the research. It is your study, it is nobody else's. This is the mountain you created for yourself and that you climbed. And the number one thing that I tell students is that you talk from experience. Again, you're the expert, and talk from the heart. Those are the two great tips for public speaking in any situation. And if you do that, you'll be fine. And of course, don't forget to rest the night before and, prepare and all that. So this video is really all about preparation and the best way to prepare for your dissertation as a whole. Now, not just chapter 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 and 5, is the tool called the dissertation checklist. This is in your student handbook at the end. And the dissertation checklist is there to help to make sure you don't forget anything. Make sure the detail is there. All the detail in the checklist is checked. And in fact, one of the tips that we're finding with dissertation students here is that we recommend use this dissertation checklist as you write your dissertation. It starts on page 31 of the dissertation handbook, and so I'm going to go over each chapter. Starts with the abstract in chapter 1. Now, if you look on this chart, if you follow exactly the way the dissertation checklist is laid out, you'll have a pretty good dissertation. If you answer all these bullet points, whether, of course, don't answer them in bullet points, but write academically and write it out to include all of these points in the bullet points, you will do fine. Now, the abstract, if you look on that, it includes the following: describes overall problem, etc., describes the purpose, theoretical foundations, succinctly describes the research design, presents the results, one or two conclusions and recommendations, and concludes with an implication statement. What a lot of people forget is that the abstract is the executive summary of the entire dissertation. If you just read the abstract, you should be able to figure out what's going on in the dissertation. High level summary. So if it's the 10,000 foot view, people use that term, the 10,000 foot view. This is the 50,000 foot view. Pretty much just goes over everything. And the abstract should be one page, no longer than one page, 200, 350 words or something like that. I think it's in the dissertation template, but limit it to just one page. Now, after that, of course, you have things like your table of contents and acknowledgments page, but I'll get to that in a bit. You get on to chapter 1, the introduction to the study. Now you'll see the components here in the checklist say that you want to have a clear, succinct introduction to the overall problem, the study, and the methodology. From there, you go on to a section on the study background and foundation, then to the problem statement, to the purpose of the study, and the methodology overview. Again, if you focus on each section and answer the section clearly to the best of your ability, you will do fine. So use this. Do not skip out parts on this because this checklist is like a dissertation template. Now, one thing students have done is they've even used the headings and subheadings from this dissertation checklist in their dissertation. So I'll find a statement that says, the title that says study background foundation, or study background, or background to the study. Then it's problem statement, purpose of the study, whole paragraphs, 2 or 3 paragraphs of this. Wow, that's very well organized. So use this as an organizing tool. All right, that's chapter 1. Then we're going to go on to chapter 2 of the dissertation, which is the literature review. Now, the transition from chapter 1 to chapter 2 should be simple and easy to understand. Don't just write chapter 1 and then all of a sudden you're at chapter 2. abruptly, you want to make a good transition to the next chapter. And this is why it's so important to have that summary. If you notice in the checklist, right at the bottom of chapter 1, there's a summary section. Be sure to summarize the chapter, summarize all your chapters, and provide a transition to the next chapter. Use your heading strategically, as I mentioned. And in chapter 2 is, of course, the literature review. The literature review comprises the longest part of the dissertation, and it's a broad-based overview of the literature. Simply, it's what did you find, or what does literature say about the topic, and what does the literature not say about the topic. The whole point of the literature review, as you know, as you've been covering here in this resident season, is to show gaps in the literature because those gaps open up your opportunity for your study. So this is that big section right here, the body of the literature review. Be sure you clarify your headings, analyze your studies, reference your literature. Do not use direct quotes. In fact, minimal direct quotes are used. Uh, Hardly use any. And in fact, try to avoid them altogether. Better to summarize. And at least 80% of the sources in the literature review must be from the past 5 years. And I'll get to that point in a bit toward the end. But just be sure to be complete in your literature review. This is where remember that your literature review is an argument as opposed to study 1 said, study 2 said, study 3 said, etc. Finally, be sure to summarize. This is very important in the literature review. Summarize because this will push you toward chapter 3, which is the methodology. So here we are at the methodology statement or section. Methodology is a restatement of your research questions. This is just the recipe. What you're going to do. How are you going to do the study? Detail, detail, detail. It's going to be if pretend you're a computer and you don't know anything. You're going to be programmed to do exactly as the recipe says. That's what the methodology is. And of course, again, here are the sections. You have your introduction. Your introduction, again, is going to be very similar to chapter 1 and chapter 2. So you'll notice in dissertations, they all sound the same in the opening, and that's purposeful. You want to get to your research method and describe the methodology and why that was chosen. Then talk about the research design. What about the data collection techniques? Do you use surveys or what specific tests are you using? Why are you using them? Are you doing interviews, focus groups, etc.? Go into detail. Then also go into detail on the instruments. What are they used and why are they even valid? Have they been validated if there's an external assessment that's been created? So talk about all that in detail. Then you get to your participants, the general demographics of the participants. If you know them, if they're relevant to the study, include them. How did you access the participants? What if you're doing a quantitative study? What about sample size? All those different things. Talk about consent. Again, these are questions you want to ask in the dissertation and should be addressed, and so the checklist goes over them. You're going to get to your data analysis methods. Talk about if you use specific software packages. Perhaps there are some software packages. In a quantitative study, maybe you used SPSS. Maybe you did it by hand. If you used qualitative software, you coded by hand. Perhaps you used qualitative software like NVivo or some other qualitative software. Limitations, be sure to include those. And of course, the summary. Don't forget the transition to chapters 4 and 5. Okay, so you'll see this tool is comprehensive. Chapter 4 is your findings or your results. So the findings and conclusions, they're tied together. So you could think of chapters 4 and 5 like we did in the previous module as tying together. Chapter 4 is what you found or what the results were. The data is the evidence, just the facts, ma'am. Chapter 5 is why you found why what you found is important. It's the discussion. It's the, so what? So in dissertations, a lot of professors will will feel that the most important chapter is really chapter 5 because, okay, you did the study and that shows you're a great researcher, But chapter 5 really shows that you've thought about this and how does this propel research and what the so what about it. This is the applied section. This is the how are you going to contribute and how are you going to make that lasting impression to the research or to the world. Now, chapter 5 also ties into chapter 2. You'll see that in chapter 4, let me go back there, findings, pretty much the findings. You present your findings with only the facts. Subheadings are used, statistics are accurate, charts and figures are properly formatted APA style. Only the findings, the results are presented. There is no explanation or discussion because you want to summarize that and transition to chapter 5, which chapter 5 is about the so what question. Application of the findings to the problem statement. So remember back in chapter 1, you talked about the problem statement. Here's the literature, here's the gap in the research. The problem is this study will address the problem of X. Now you did that, you did the study, let's say it's a qualitative study, you did interviews, you had some findings. How did what you found in your study really relate to leadership? That's going to be an important section. So you'll notice a distinction in the checklist between application of findings and conclusion to the problem statement and application to leadership. Those are different. One is specifically to your problem statement and one is more broad to leadership. What does it mean for leaders who are in this situation? What does it mean for the field of leadership? It's very important that you also include recommendations for action. So let's discuss what about this research is important. What is going to apply? What recommendations can you make? What are 3 recommendations from this study that can happen for leaders or in this context? And then finally, recommendations for future research. Let's say another study could be done that replicates this with a different population or with a different location, for example, or a different data set. What might be done? What are some ideas that you have for recommendations for future research? That's what we want to see. Again, comprehensive to the T. Finally, I want to get to the other stuff, which is the concluding statement. This is your final closing statement that ties it all together, leaving the reader with an overall message regarding the value and contributions of the study. Okay, that's the final emphasis, like, your period, I am done, exclamation mark, so be it. All right, those are the 5 chapters of the checklist. Now, there's some other things in here that your dissertation chair will be using to ensure that you've satisfied this criteria. And these are these little things like front matter, for example. So front matter includes your abstract, your acknowledgments, your table of contents, table of tables. They all must conform to APA standards. And your writing style should be a scholarly language throughout. Make sure your writing is clear, precise, avoids redundancy. Do not use the word very a lot, things like that. The flow of words is smooth, comprehensible. Don't use quotes. If you do have quotes, make them less than 1% of the dissertation, unless, this is the only exception, unless they are the quotes from your participants, like the data in chapter 4 or 5. Anyway, don't use quotes. Organization and form. Again, I can't stress APA enough. APA is important. Make sure it's throughout. And this is also important. At least 80% of the references are from the last 5 years. Your dissertation chair will check. And we have told students that, oh, you are at 75%. You need to find more references. And we could talk through some ideas of how you do that. Where most of it's going to happen is in your chapter 2. You could put some in chapter 5 as well, but ideally, this is why you want to have the most recent references. I would say try to go with even 4 years to give yourself some buffer. All right. Writing is error-free, again, APA style. Appendices, you're going to make sure that the appendices, whatever you feel is appropriate, is in there. Things like the consent form, perhaps there's a sample of the instrument that's used. Sometimes raw data is even in there. So whatever you and your chair decide about appendices, you include in there. The final steps, the chair, committee, dissertation director, and the dean all approve the dissertation. Then it's going to be archived and then submitted to the library to be added to ProQuest. Yes, your dissertation makes up some of the research, and you'll be able to look up your name in the dissertation abstracts and say, wow, that was my work. Now, okay, all that's done. You have one final thing, and that's called the dissemination plan. The dissemination plan is a one-page document. This is separate from your dissertation. It can be a Word document, it can be bullet points, whatever. It's turned in with your dissertation before the defense. The dissemination plan is essentially what you are going to do with your dissertation. And don't just put, I'm going to put it on my bookshelf. I know mine is, but what are you going to do with it? In other words, what are you going to do to make these results available to the world? Some students have said, I'm going to present this at a conference, or I plan to present this at a conference, or I plan to speak to the head of the program in this organization and talk about my results, or I want to do a short presentation, or I want to incorporate this into a class. Some have said, I want to turn this into a book. So the point is that this is a dissemination plan. This is not exactly what you've done. This is a plan for what you want to do, probably within the next 6 months to a year, okay? Because the goal of this is we do not want your dissertation to sit on the shelf. It's going to sit on the shelf after you've done your dissemination plan, but we want you to get this results out there. And this is why your chair has worked so hard with you to get this dissertation good and ready to be applied to. It's the so what question. All right? Dissemination plan, very important. Finally, this little cartoon. Well, the difference between landing on the moon and, getting an EDD. And landing on the moon, Neil Armstrong said it's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Well, or humankind. Well, getting an EDD is a huge monumental task, and you've worked so hard to get this. And this cartoon's great. I spent 7 years on this, and hopefully you won't spend 7 years. So, it's one giant leap for one person, but it's one tiny insignificant step, and I hate using that word insignificant, but it's one tiny step for mankind because your research was so focused and so specific to a problem. Yes, you did make huge gains on this specific problem, and in light of history and light of research, it's a small, small step. But for you, it's a giant leap, and you accomplished something amazing and incredible, and we're going to be so proud to call you doctor when it's done. So with that, I want to say thank you for viewing this video. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, I'd love to hear from you. Please send me an email, talk to your chair about it. Feel free to stop and review the video at times. If you need any resources, please contact your chair or myself or any of the other faculty here at CityU. We're so happy that you have chosen this program and look forward to shaking your hand at that defense and saying, hey, thank you, you did a great job. And then, finally on graduation to say, Dr. So-and-so, it's going to be wonderful. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.